to order. I've got 902?
901.
901 on April the 3rd of 2020. Roll call, please.
Scholl,
Here.
DeCook,
Here.
McIntyre.
Here.
Okay, we just have one item today, and that is consider adoption of Warren County, Iowa Infectious Disease Action Plan COVID-19 pandemic with possible action.
So with legislation that passed on March 18th in regards to additional leave available to employees, we've received a draft policy from Allers and Cooney on how to implement that legislation. It's a little more complicated. It's not as straightforward as one would hope. And the Department of Labor continually is kind of changing their guidance and coming out with additional guidance on it, and there is likely more legislation coming. So this is a work in progress as far as a document, but we need something in place because we're going to have employees start using leave for various reasons, and we need to have the board consider these items. Tessa, the HR coordinator, and Don Bowman with the attorney's office, and myself, we've consulted with Joe Dean in public health as well as the sheriff's department because it particularly pertains to sections for his office. So we've gone through the policy and we've drafted, modified it for Warren County. The board, you each have a copy of that policy, and I'd like to go through it a little bit slower maybe with the board today because there are some decisions to make. Legislation-wise, the board has to do what the legislation says, but the board can go above and beyond what the legislation provides as well, and those are really the determinations that we're seeking from the board at this time. If you are wanting to go above and beyond, or how you are wanting to go above and beyond. So that policy just starts with the goals. Our goal is to protect our employees and our citizens, and we're trying to establish a consistent approach to the infectious disease. It goes in a little bit of a description on the COVID-19. This policy is specific to the COVID-19. So action items. Specifically, we were writing this, if a shelter-in-place order is issued, the county government will continue to provide essential services. We know there won't be a complete shutdown of the county. We've reached out to departments head, asked them to make sure they have an emergency plan in place depending on what exemptions there are. From everything that I've read from Homeland Security as far as essential functions and from reading shelter-in-place orders from other states, there's a great deal of, most county functions are exempted out of those orders. So roads and emergency services, all of those. But we will also get to the point where, because we are limiting public access, we may have staff that is running out of things to do. And we may need to consider those items and what we're going to do with that staff. So those are the kind of things that we're looking for from the board as we go through this. So the first part of it is really the emergency paid leave. Now this is mandated. There's 80 hours of emergency leave for 6 specific reasons. However, the legislation says that if it's for reasons 1, 2, and 3, which would be if you are under a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order, if you have been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to concerns related to COVID-19, or if the employee is experiencing symptoms of COVID-19, that 80 hours is at 100% of their wages. If the employee is caring for an individual who is subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine order or advice to self-quarantine, I think that reads wrong. Dawn, do you see that? Number 1 and number 4? The employee is caring for an individual who is subject to the quarantine, or the isolation order, as opposed to being under it themselves. They're caring for another individual. If the employee is caring for a son or a daughter that's under the age of 18, due to the school or place of care of the daughter closed, or a child care provider is unavailable due to the COVID-19, or if they are experiencing a substantially similar condition, that has certain specifications. Under items 4, 5, and 6, the 80 hours is at 2/3 pay. It is not at 100% pay if it is for those items. What we have put into the policy requesting from the board is, and Dawn revise this a little bit this morning, as opposed to items 4, 5, and 6 being at 2/3 pay, it would be our recommendation that this 80 hours of paid for full-time employees or 2-week equivalent of pay for part-time employees is a separate source of paid leave required by the FFCRA, and during this 80 hours, employees' personal accrued leave banks will not be depleted, and the employee will be paid 100% of their salary for any of the 6 qualifying events. So that would be our recommendation, that it be full pay, so that is above and beyond what the legislation says for that piece of it. Does the board have any thoughts on making that change to be 100% for any of those reasons?
It's a maximum.
Megan,
Go ahead.
Yes, Doug?
Okay, if I understood it right, whatever we approve today, the policy would go through December 31st, 2020.
Yes, that's per legislation.
Number 2, if we approved, whatever we approve, can we change that between now and December 31st, 2020?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You can't change the legislation piece of it, you can change anything that you do above and beyond it.
Correct.
Yeah, I got you, I understand. Now, so, obviously we know that it's not our employees' fault that this happened. You know, it's one of those things that is worldwide, and, I mean, it's very, very unusual, and of course, you know, I'm thinking that, probably our employees, they've got, as far as I could be able to determine, they have all of their normal expenses if they were working or not working. So, just so I understand, Megan, one of the things that we could do is, rather than going to the 2/3, we could go to 100% on
Yes.
4, 5, and 6.
Yes, for the 80 hours of the COVID sick leave, it would be 100% for all employees that qualify under those any of those 6 reasons.
Yeah, and now we know 4, 5, and 6 are 2/3.
Correct.
Okay, so I guess what I'd like the other 2 supervisors to consider, making 4, 5, and 6 100%. And one of the things that we know is we've already got a budget that takes us through June 30th of 2020. And, you know, I've talked to Megan just a little bit about this, and we don't know for sure, but it seems like the property taxes are coming in hopefully normal for the March period. That's, what is it, due on April 1st?
Yes, that was due April. And Julie is here at the meeting, Doug, and she's shaking her head at me that yes, it appears. I mean, they've got mail. It appears that those payments have been coming in as regular.
Yeah. So my thought being is we're going to get our revenues. Now we know an issue is going to be over in secondary roads on that gas tax. I mean,
Right.
I doubt if we've got 50% travel going on, but that's a different issue.
Sure.
And
Some of those other revenues will be down.
Pardon?
Some of those other revenues will be down.
Yeah, but is it fair for me to say I don't think it will materially affect the, what do I call it, the general fund?
I think that's reasonable at this point with the information we have.
Yeah, so, my recommendation to the other 2 supervisors is that we go to 100% on 1 through 6.
Okay.
And I'll weigh in as well. This is Aaron. I agree with you, Doug. It's 80 hours. The legislation's already there. And I don't see any reason why we would do the minimum for our employees at this time. You're spot on, their expenses are not gonna decrease dramatically. Their obligations for what I anticipate are car payments or rent payments or food payments. In fact, their food payments are probably going up as their kids are home from college and they're juggling. So considering that it's 2 weeks, I have absolutely, I 100% agree with you. I'd like to do 100% pay for those 80 hours for our employees.
Aaron, tell me what you meant by the 2 weeks.
This is the COVID, there's two pieces to the legislation. One of the pieces of legislation is this emergency sick leave that's only available for those 6 reasons. As far as any
that's what we're
additional
dealing
leave
with.
thereafter, we're gonna get to that. But this is specific to the 80 hours that you have to have one of the 6 qualifying events to qualify to receive this 80 hours. It's not just
Okay.
for any reason. We'll get further on down the line as we're kind of going through this. We'll get to those scenarios. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Crystal,
Yes,
what are your thoughts on the 80?
they've already been shared by Doug
Okay.
and Aaron.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Perfect.
so I think that piece of the policy we'll put at the 100% regardless of what qualifying event that you're under. Dawn, do you need anything else from as far as that piece of it? What's the next? Oh, you know what? So the other piece is going to be the FMLA leave, the emergency paid sick leave, or the emergency expanded FMLA is specific to that qualifying number 5 where you're caring for a son or daughter that does not have care because of this. And that leave expanded FMLA to include the ability for employees to file FMLA, and the employer will pay 2/3 of that employee's regular rate of pay while they are on that FMLA leave to care for their child. The employee can, per this policy, supplement the additional 1/3 to make their full wages with their own accrued leave. So that's what's within this policy. The legislative part of it is the employer will pay the 2/3, and they do qualify for that FMLA. But as far as being able to supplement with the rest of theirs, I think that was in the legislation as well. So this doesn't, I don't think there was anything on this one that was different than what the legislation was.
There does look like there's a cap on it though.
There is a cap. There is a cap, $200 a day. Aggregate is 10,000 in the aggregate, and that's per legislation.
Yep.
And that's item number 5, Megan?
Yeah, you have to qualify under that item number 5 to qualify for this expanded FMLA leave.
Okay.
So this one, we didn't put anything different in there as far as anything above and beyond. It was just that 2/3. But what we did, I think, add to the policy would be we have in here that if a shelter-in-place order is issued by the state or federal government, the county government will continue to provide essential services as mandated by the state or federal government with minimal staff at the discretion of the elected official or department head. Employees may be allowed to work from home with advanced approval from the elected official or department head. In some instances, these employees may be required to work overtime or otherwise adjust their regular schedules to assist during this crisis. They will be compensated pursuant to their collective bargaining agreement, memorandum of understanding, or Warren County policy or state or federal law. Warren County may modify work schedules as follows at the discretion of the elected official or department head. They can work from home entirely. 2, work partially from home and work partially at the work site. 3, work staggered shifts either on a full-time or part-time basis. Or 4, adjust or otherwise reduce their hours. So this is giving leave to the department heads to be able to structure their departments the way that they need to keep essential functions running, as well as trying to adhere as much as we can to that social distancing and isolation as much as possible. The piece of it is, if we have it in here, if the shelter in place order is issued, that employees that are sent home because of that will be paid 2/3 pay while they are at home, not working. So this is employees that are not working from home, they're just at home, but during that shelter in place order, they would be receiving 2/3 pay. It would be at the department head's discretion which employees those would be. That ones that had to stay at work and ones that would be sent home. So we built it. That is not legislation. That is above and beyond what legislation says that you need to do as far as what we've seen. So this is full-time employees that normally scheduled to work a 40-hour week. They work less than 40 hours due to the COVID. The employee shall be compensated for all hours worked at full pay, and any hours not worked up to 40 hours at 2/3 of the regular rate of pay. This leave will not be considered the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, because again, that's not covered under legislation. This is above and beyond that. While this policy is in place, part-time employees would be compensated working each week for those regular hours for which they do not work due to COVID-19. They would be compensated at 2/3 for the rate of pay as defined in the FFCRA. Part-time employees' regular hours will be calculated based on the average number of hours. So we average it out to make sure that we're getting part-time employees paid. The leave would not be considered FFCRA. So what that means to the board is, if you were to go above and beyond, if at some point we are eligible for some type of replacement from the federal or state government in regards to this, you would not be able to claim any of these items that we go above and beyond the legislation. You're not going to be able to claim those from everything that we're seeing right now. But again, this is changing daily as we tackle it. So, and specifically, we just put in if there was a shelter-in-place order. That doesn't mean right now. That just means if that happens is when we would start paying employees 2/3 pay. Again, the board can go above and beyond that. If we have employees now that are running out of things to do, and that department head feels that they need to, send these people home, at this point, that would be a temporary layoff, and they would file for unemployment. I'm not sure what the board's position is on how they would like to handle those situations where we're seeing, the longer this goes on, the more that we may run into those instances where there isn't enough to fill the days. And do you want to do temporary layoffs, or are you wanting to do maybe do a supplemental 2/3 pay if you're not working, and then you can use the rest of your leaves to make up the difference for your full wages if you choose to. Now, certainly during those times, you would not accrue additional leave while you were gone.
Megan?
Yes, Doug?
We know that if they go on what am I saying?
Unemployment?
To unemployment compensate, we have to pay that too, the unemployment.
Correct, that's correct. The county pays the unemployment as well. The benefit to the 2/3 is that, if we're doing temporary layoffs and unemployment, then we're not, the benefit piece of it, being able to keep our employees on their benefits, paying for their benefits, as
Right.
opposed to having to do layoffs, temporary layoffs.
Yeah, I guess I would ask the other two board members what they think about, I hope I say this right, that paying 100% for what Megan just explained.
As opposed to doing 2/3?
Correct.
Well, is it my understanding that, okay, they would get the 2/3, but then that 80-hour leave, they could use that to make up the difference?
It's a different topic.
No, it would be, so like the first 2 weeks that they were out, if it's for, that would not be a qualifying event under the COVID-19 sick leave. If your employer doesn't have work for you, is not a qualifying event for the 80 hours of sick leave.
We could theoretically, as a board though, we could theoretically add qualifying event number 7, and that is our governor issues a shelter-in-place order so that the first 2 weeks
that you would pay 2 weeks at 100%
Could be-
and then
could
go
be
to
caught
2/3.
If
I mean, it would be kind of a separate piece.
it
It has
is,
to be a separate
And
piece,
if
it
they
could not be
didn't
part of.
use it already too, cause some of them are using it for,
yeah, some are already probably
yeah,
using that.
so they could potentially not have it if they've already used it.
It might
Right, I
catch
mean, the
some of our employees.
COVID-19 emergency sick leave, it's a one-time use. You use it for one of those it's not per occurrence, so you can't use it to care for a child for 2 weeks, and then if you get sick, then use it again to get sick. It's a one-time, everything that we've seen.
I understand, but for our employees that have not used it, if the governor, let's say she issues the shelter-in-place order on Sunday afternoon, and if they have not used it, like I suspect a vast majority of our employees have not used it yet, we could make the first 2 weeks a qualifying event so that at least for the first 2 weeks, it's just nice and easy and clean at 100%.
Right, I mean, that would just be the board's
I understand.
local policy that if a shelter-in-place happens, 2 weeks would be paid at full pay for any employees that were sent home, and then pay thereafter at 2/3.
And that's maybe a little bit of middle ground between rolling it at 100%. I'm a little, personally, Doug, I like where your heart is on that. I'm just a little leery because I don't know what sort of time frame we might be looking at in a shelter, with a shelter-in-place order in the event that it goes 2 or 3 months. That starts to become a little much, I think.
I think this is I think that she's gonna be forced to have a lock-in or whatever you call it.
I do too.
Shelter in place, because we're at one of 5 states. I can see that coming. Okay, Megan, if we put them on unemployment,
Yes,
do they lose their health insurance?
yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so here's
I
my
agree.
take on that. Under no circumstance am I gonna vote or support layoffs and losing health insurance in this storm. That is morally wrong to me. I do not like it. I don't think it's fair. These employees didn't do anything wrong. It's not their fault. And frankly, just economically, yes, we'd still have benefits and IPERS and healthcare component of it, the wellness plan, I suppose. But we're gonna pay for their unemployment anyway. So if we furloughed 50 employees, we're still paying 2/3 unemployment. At a minimum, for the morale of our county employees, if we're paying that either way, I don't wanna go down that road. I think we're gonna just crush people's morale. I do not wanna do layoffs unless we absolutely have to. I much prefer doing 2/3 pay if not working from a shelter in place. I'd like to give them 2 weeks in the event that they've not already used their 80 hours of emergency COVID hours. For those folks, pay them full pay for two weeks and then go to a 2/3 pay with their ability to use their PTO. There's gonna be no accrual, so they're not getting more PTO while they're not working or servicing, constituents. But I think that seems pretty equitable. But I do not wanna fire people and pull them from healthcare at this point. I mean, that's like the emergency last straw, and we're not there. We're not there by a long shot.
Okay, because I'm having just a little struggle here and there, and I understand the first 80 hours, but what are we doing? We're not gonna pay them 100%?
The suggestion is to do 2/3 of their wages, and they can supplement with their own leave balances to get 100% wages if they're not working.
If they are working from home,
Those
they're
hours are
receiving full
100%.
pay and they're receiving accruals. If the governor issues a shelter at home order and there's no work for them to do because they're Kurt, and Kurt works on building and maintenance stuff, and if he's locked in his home, he's not working on building and maintenance stuff here, there's not gonna be work for him to do at his residence. So at that point, he could use, I'd like to make it so he could use, if he hasn't used the first 80 hours, do 2 weeks at full pay, full benefits, then after the shelter-in-place order occurs, I would then like to see it go to 2/3, because that's what's gonna happen in the event of no work for someone for months. That's what the business community is gonna do, is they're gonna let someone go. We are gonna pay for their unemployment anyways, and I don't wanna do that, so let's pay unemployment, basically the 2/3, and benefits during that period of shelter in place. I think that's equitable in my mind for not working.
And they can use any
And they can
accruals
still-
that they
yeah.
have at
And if
this
they
point
have
to
70
supplement to get to the full wages.
If they have 70 or 100 hours of PTO, and they can, at their own discretion, use that PTO to supplement wages, I think that's equitable.
And then when they run out of sick leave or vacation or whatever, they're just back to 2/3.
Yes.
That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, just so you know, I kind of struggle with all this because it's certainly not their fault. It's not anyone's fault, but, so when somebody runs, I think this thing is gonna go on for a while. So if somebody runs out of benefits, so they're back to 2/3.
Yes.
But would they get, so like IFRS, they would get 2/3, whatever their pay is, and 2/3 is what would be withheld for IFRS, and we would match that. I mean, whatever the numbers are, 9% or whatever. I didn't say that very well, but okay, they're gonna get a reduced amount for IFRS when they're on 2/3.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess I'm asking the other two, do we think it's over the top to pay them the 100% and not take it out of their benefits?
I mean, I think that's a little rich, and, not because I wanna be harsh on people, I don't. But I'm also aware that the federal government's sending stimulus checks to the tune of, $2,400 for a couple, or $3,000 for a family of 4. This is really sort of a stopgap measure, to keep people employed, to let them have a spot to come back to, and if it's a month or two, I think that this scenario works out okay. If it's going into the fall, I mean, I don't know. You can't, if you look at the opposite side of it, and let's say that this goes really long, and I don't think that it will, but let's say that it goes a year. I mean, at some point, the county cannot pay every county employee to not work for some extended duration period of time. There's an upper limit to it. And so I think we have to be somewhat prudent, because I know that the lost revenues are gonna decrease. The gas tax revenues are gonna decrease. I'd like to think that the state or the feds will provide some relief to us, but based on history, I'm not so positive that's gonna happen. And so I think we have to take a somewhat prudent approach to it. And I feel like at 2/3, that's exactly what would happen in the business world, except we're not letting anyone go. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, here's what I think I'm at. I like the 100%. I know, I don't know what, I'm guessing that our employees are most likely to maybe have some psychological problems with all this, and knowing that we could change this policy, I guess in the future, anytime we want to, I just feel a whole lot better if this thing, say, gets done July 1st or whatever, and that we stayed behind our employees 100%. I feel a whole lot more comfortable, but I'm only 1 out of 3.
Crystal, what are your thoughts?
I agree with standing behind our employees, but we have to consider the taxpayers, and we're all taxpayers here. We have to be pretty reasonable about the backwards, especially for this type of event. But I don't know if I want to go to the maximum amount in cases that, are completely out of our control, like the governor issued a stay in place order. I just, yeah, no.
So just so Crystal, this is Doug.
Sure.
I wasn't sure if you said you're for the 100% or 2/3.
I'm for the 2/3. Anything that they're having to stay home out of their control, meaning they're not sick, they're not taking care of one of those other reasons, but they just absolutely have to stay home because of some order. I would rather go to the 2/3.
Okay. Yeah. Obviously, I'd rather go the 100%, but.
Well,
no
guys,
problem.
what about that middle ground? And that's kind of where I was at too. And I respect both of the thoughts on it. I'm just trying to. It's tough to figure it out because we don't know how long it's going to be. If you would tell me definitively that this is 6 weeks, I can
Right.
I can come up with a decision much better, and my decision's probably more like 100%. If you're going to tell me that it's 3 months, then at some point we have to realistically look at our revenues and employees that are literally not working or able to work, because you have to remember that there's going to be a good number of our employees that even with a shelter in place can do something at full pay from their home. At least some of them can. So that lessens the sting a little bit in my mind. But why don't we realistically add our own, since we can sort of change some things and modify as we see fit? Why don't we just make qualifying event number 7? I know that it's not going to be part of that policy, and I understand that because that's a specific legislation, but why don't, for our employees, we do the first number 7 qualifying event of governor issues stay-at-home order. So for at least the first 2 weeks or 80 hours, nothing's changed. You get to go, you're home, you don't have to work, or you can't work. If you can work, then let that 80 happen later. But that should help bridge the gap too. And in the event that this is 6 weeks, I'm gonna guess that most of our employees are going to be receiving somewhere north of 85 or 95% of their pay for that 6 weeks. Now, if it goes longer, then you're right, Doug. Then they're not gonna receive that. It's gonna be closer to 70% or 75% of their pay if they're really unable to do any work from home. But as far as what I've seen with other companies, layoff numbers, I saw unemployment numbers came in yesterday at another 6.6 million. Now we're about 10 million unemployed in the U.S. In another week, it'll be 18 million. This is if you have a county position, I'm just telling you, you've got a pretty good thing going to weather where we're at now compared to what most people in the U.S. are going to be looking at. Now, we have to also be cognizant that it's taxpayers that are paying for this, either with property taxes or gas taxes or sales taxes. I mean, that's where we're deriving our money to pay our employees. I think that's a pretty fair approach. If we added that 80 hours for sort of an exemption number 7 to it to start, I think that's gonna catch and true up most people. And yeah, are you gonna have to use your PTO during that period of time if you want full pay? Absolutely. And that's fair. I mean, that is infinitely better than someone who tends bars, a waitress, or is a factory worker and it's shut down. They just got marched to the unemployment line without benefits. And that, combined with what the federal government's doing with respect to stimulus checks, I'm pretty confident that we're gonna be in a pretty good place for our employees if we take that approach. Now, some are gonna be mad or not like it, but that's pretty generous, I think, from my perspective. I mean, it's better than the recommendation that was brought to us. I mean, it's richer than that, and I think that's solid.
Yeah. I hear you. loud and clear, Aaron, not so, maybe not so clear, but it's just because of the the phone, but, is there
You want to talk?
anything that we could consider that we take this to July first, then it goes back to the 2/3? I'm just throwing things out. I just know that I think it's gonna be pretty tough for our employees, and I understand about, it's a whole lot better, I think, than being on unemployment, but, yeah, whatever. I'm not
Our
trying
treasurer would
to
like to say,
get above it all.
could you talk to him?
I'm just trying to be
Sure.
compassionate to employees.
Hi guys, this is Julie Darty. Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is just a thought. If she does a shelter in place and you are all thinking or inclined to do 100%, you could always put a date on it. You could say, you know, if she puts a shelter in place Monday for 60 days, you'll do, or through the fiscal year or whatever, you know, you can always revisit it later, since we don't know how long it could last. I mean, you know, just a thought.
Yeah.
You've got your budget year already done for, you know, this year. That's all.
I think, I thought that's what I was trying to say, I mean, someday.
Right.
Lindsay, and I just want you guys to know that there's people posting questions under the chat on Zoom, so, I just want you guys to be aware that there's some questions out there, or some comments.
Yeah, I see the questions. If the board's gonna open it up for everybody to have discussion, then I'll read the questions. But to this point, it's been a discussion of the board.
Okay.
My communication wasn't very good, but
So Doug, you'd like to see something of, at least through the end of this fiscal year, so through June 30th of 2020, it would, any employees that are sent home for this would be at 100% through June 30th, or how long the shelter in place order, whichever.
Okay, here's,
whichever is shorter, I guess.
Right.
sure. I understand and appreciate that. Here's a question for the board to ponder if we go that route. Now, if it's a month or 30 days, I'm probably fine with that. In fact, I am fine with that. So I might be supportive of that at 30 days. Here's my question to the board. If you run that scenario out, we get a shelter in place, let's say Sunday, and it goes on for 45 days or 60 days or 30 days, whatever it is. And we are guaranteeing 100% rate of pay and benefits to all employees because the governor issued a shelter in place order. Now, many of our employees are still gonna be essential. Some of them are gonna be working from home for pay, for their full pay, while others will be at home, not working at all for their full pay. That conceptually gives me a little bit of a pause, because if I were just an average employee, I might look at it and say, which one of those two groups would I rather be in? The one who works from home for full pay during this time, or performs their essential duties for the county, which I think many of them are going to fit in that category, or the employee that is considered non-essential and receives full pay while not working at all during that 60 days or 90 days. There is a reason why we are looking at, I'm looking at 2/3 and something else, or 100% for 80 hours and then 2/3, is because that too will draw
For equity towards the employees that are gonna
that are
have to
go-
work,
that are
and
going to
are not
be-
gonna have a choice to
that
go
are going
home
to
and
be
just get paid to go
working.
home.
Yes.
You guys are kind of talking over each other. but
Sorry.
It's true that the department head is gonna decide who does what, isn't that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the employee. The employee, I understand what Aaron's saying. If I were an employee that no, no duties, but that's not decided by the employee, it's decided by the department head, but hey, I'm just trying to look after our employees, and so, Aaron, is there anything that, let's see, I think where you're at, if she has a lockdown or whatever, I just think she's gonna be under tremendous pressure because we're down to one of 5 states. You're saying that if she does that for a period of time, we'd pay them 100%? And not sure.
Yeah, here's
Where were you?
here's where I'm at. If the governor issues a shelter-in-place order, that changes things, but we all pretty much agree that that's likely at this point. We're one of a few states that haven't done so yet. It's probably coming. In the event that she does it, I would like to see an 80 hours or a 2-week period of full pay, full benefits for each of our employees, regardless of if they're essential, non-essential, working, not working. And then at that point, I'm still supportive of going to a 2/3 pay for those that are home and not working. If there's work for them to do from the department heads that they can work from home, they'll receive full pay. If they can do some work from home, they'll receive full pay for that, and then 2/3 on the other portion of it, and we can calculate that. No accruals during that period of time of shelter in place, and then I think we at a minimum run that scenario through this fiscal year, and if we need to adjust, we certainly can come back and adjust and make it. If this is creating problems for people, we can come back and look at it at any real point in time. But I think that spreads some equity between our employees that are going to be home with nothing to do and the employees that are going to be home but still have true responsibilities to their offices and to the taxpayers who are paying them. And otherwise, I have an issue if we're all, no one else is doing that. No one else is doing that. And I think that while that is very generous, and I understand and commend the thoughts about where you're at, Doug, we're gonna have some issues under that scenario, I think. So I'm supportive of, if she issues the order, 80 hours, and then go to the 2/3 sort of plan as presented is where I'd like to be.
Okay, Aaron, you talk about non-accruals. Are we talking about they don't receive vacation accruals and sick leave?
They won't continue to accrue, so we accrue leave right now per pay period. We would shut those off so that employees are not accruing additional leave as they're not working. Similar like when you're on short-term disability. They can use what they have, they're just not gonna bank anymore.
If they're not working?
If they're not working, correct.
Let's say I'm at home and I'm getting paid 100% because I've got duties. They would accrue it?
Yes, because they're working.
But if I'm at home and I'm on the 2/3, I wouldn't accrue.
Correct.
Okay.
But you do keep your
Yeah,
benefits, and you're keeping your health insurance, and the county's still paying its portion of your health insurance, which is.
I think that's extreme.
I do too.
I think that's extremely important.
I do too.
I don't want to get too much more in the weeds, but I could see where we give them 2/3 of their vacation and sick leave, but, okay. I don't know, have we been through everything, Megan, on this
No,
7-page?
the last piece of it that we need the board to kind of think about, and the sheriff can jump in on this if he would like. So emergency responders.
Hey, time out. Before we go to that, Supervisor McIntyre, I know we've sort of
Yes.
bounced around on this last issue some. Where are you at?
I'm with you. I do not, want to pay the full, wage at this point. I can't see where that's fair to the average taxpayer who will never see a benefit like that, at where they're at. So,
Okay.
but I do not want our employees to have to go to unemployment.
Do you want me to read the things that have been written?
And by the way, Aaron, you know, other employees could receive, I think, Crystal said wouldn't receive this amount of benefits. It could be that they do, but I don't wanna make a point out of it. Just so, where I'm at right now, I'd like to pay 100%, but whatever motion is made, I'm gonna support it, just so everybody knows. But I'm for 100%.
Understood. Do we actually need a board motion then on this one?
We will, when we
Okay.
get to the very end,
Okay.
I'll ask you to adopt the policy as, adjusted during this meeting so that we can put a final draft in order and get
Understood.
it taken care of.
Okay.
And Don needs to come up with a motion, because I'm not sure I can make one.
I am also out of reading the motion, so it's either Crystal or Dawn.
We'll figure it out when you get there.
Do you want me to read this?
Sure. There are some comments from is this a Zoom meeting?
It is, yeah, this is the Zoom meeting.
So let's read them into the record so
This
we
is,
can discuss them if we need to.
Janet Bunce from the assessor. I feel since the budgets are already approved for fiscal year 2020, we should pay it 100%. If we pay it 2/3, we'll have a surplus next fiscal year. Teachers are getting paid 100% and paid by taxpayer dollars. We need to support the employees of this county for their safety and the safety of their families. Janet, I understand for your budget, you're 100% tax funded as far as property tax, but the county's budget is not 100% property tax. About 59% of our budget comes from property tax. There's other revenues that go into funding. So when we set our budget, we anticipated other revenues that we may see depleted, which means that we are likely looking at using up fund balances. So our budget is not necessarily completely tax-based, whereas I haven't looked closely, but I would say that the schools are state funding and property tax are what they're seeing as well. And as well as your budget is 100% property tax, but the county's budget is not.
That's an excellent point.
Are there any other comments?
And then David has a comment, David the engineer. Can Troy walk us through what the different levels entail? And I'm assuming, David, is that in regards to, from the continuity of operations plan, those levels of critical that were set back in 2012 and may not necessarily be pertinent to this scenario right now?
Yeah, that's correct. We were just curious as to what the definitions of each level were. It's our understanding that was, I guess, produced in 2012. So we were just curious on that end, and just wanted to note that we're well aware of the road use tax fund, and we're going to closely monitor that over the coming months, and probably have some further discussions on what we can do to possibly start going to bare minimum operations next year if we have to. So, but yeah, just maybe walk through what those levels sort of mean in that plan.
I would point out that so far of the 2 questions received, well, David's isn't exactly, it's a little different, but for the assessor and the engineer's office, it would be my strong suspicion that both of those office and their employees, many of them are going to be considered highly essential, and there will be work to do for those employees. The assessor's office isn't going away at this point, and there should be work to do either from home or whatever. So I mean, it might be less of an impact than you might suspect, but we don't know that yet. But yeah, I do anticipate gravel still heads out to the roads, and I'm pretty comfortable that the governor is going to exempt large chunks of our operations, and so there should be work to do for the majority of our employees in either scenario. So what we're really dealing with is a small subset of our employees in the event the governor issues a shelter at home order after 80 hours. And that's really where we're at, so.
Aaron, can I talk to, just for a second to fill you guys in what Dave's talking about? Is that all right?
Yeah, you bet.
Sure.
What he's talking about is the critical designations, critical 1, 2, 3, 4. What that is we have to have the deputies work. We have to have the law enforcement center, which is was the jail, but also the 911 center, emergency management, the board of supervisors. To keep government going, we need those. So they're the top critical. The second critical is we need the auditor's office to pay the bills, the engineer's office to keep the roads open, the health services, county attorney, and environmental health. Then it goes on to the rest. It just labels it out. It's kind of comes from Homeland Security and their documents and what to go by, but essential service is critical 1, and then critical 2, 3, 4. That's what he's talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Troy.
Yeah.
Are we on to are there any more comments, or? is that-
Those were the only two written comments.
What is the final piece that we're looking
The
at?
final piece for the board is, this leave policy does not pertain to emergency responder employees, including sheriff's deputies and dispatchers and other first responder employees. Emergency responders are expected to report to work regardless of their circumstances, unless they exhibit COVID-19 symptoms. In that situation, they should report their symptoms immediately to their elected official or department head and wait for further instructions. The legislation allows for first responders to be exempted out of policies. So this policy would not apply to those first responder employees in the sheriff's office. And that being that the sheriff cannot operate if he has 10 deputies home watching children and 5 dispatchers out caring for. So that's why those exemptions are in place unless they are ill. So I wanted to make sure that the board, and Sheriff, please jump in if you have any, it gives the sheriff ability to keep his operations running.
Such as Megan, this Troy, that would be the critical 1 that you just mentioned. It is the emergency responders of the county departments. Got to have dispatch, whether it's here or if a building falls apart, it goes to another place. We would send our dispatchers to Westcom or used to be City of Indianola, but there's a plan for backup for that type of stuff.
Okay. It's not really possible to change that one, and it
Well,
certainly
it's a may. I mean,
Yeah.
it
wouldn't be prudent to change that.
Correct. So that is within the policy too, is exempting out those employees from
Got it.
this policy.
Okay.
So those are the items, kind of in a nutshell that we went through, but that the board needs to. So Dawn, I'm gonna leave it up to you to maybe make a suggestion on what that resolution should sound like.
So we basically changed 2 of those sections. The one at the top of the document under action is that we have changed, and I'm gonna read what I heard everybody say, and I want you to see if this is what you said. Employees who are unable to work from home, and this is if there's that shelter-in-place order issued either by the state government or the federal government. Employees who are unable to work from home or who are not essential employees who must work will be eligible for 100% of pay for 80 hours. After the 80 hours has been used, the employees who are home due to a shelter-in-place order from the state or federal government will receive 2/3 pay for non-worked hours as described below on the order of the state or the federal mandate for additional social distancing or closures, i.e. shelter-in-place. Is that accurate as to what you're proposing?
It is. From my perspective, yes.
And then under the emergency paid sick leave, under FRCWA, that is, what I heard everybody say was, or what I heard being proposed was, this 80 hours of paid leave for full-time employees or 2-week equivalent pay for part-time employees is a separate source of paid leave required by FMLA. During this 80 hours.
Hold on, it kicked me out.
Are we past our 40 minutes?
Probably. I don't know why it kicked me out.
Cause it's only free for 40 minutes once you subscribe. We have backup recording going right now, so let's get Doug and Crystal back on the phone. And that way we can still proceed. I mean, we are recording the meeting for a public record, we're recording it here. The people that were watching the meeting, on the other hand, are not gonna be overly pleased, but that's,
I think it's all up. It had some weird update, so I'm running the update, and I'm gonna get that
okay.
Hello.
Hey, Crystal, I've got you on my cell phone on speaker. This is Dawn.
Okay.
We got kicked off of the meeting.
Was anybody else cut off?
I think everybody got kicked out, actually. I'm back in now.
Okay, all right, super. Yeah, I tried to call the meeting number and it said that it was, had not started. So.
Lies.
What about Doug?
Back on while your party is reached.
Will we all have to file for that unemployment for the 2/3, or will that be automatic pay from the county?
Oh, it's not unemployment, but it's just pay.
It'll be how you put it in your time card is how we know that it's non-work hours. So that's what we'll have to establish.
But there's now theoretically, what, 160 hours between the FMLA pay, if you qualify, and another 80 hours from shelter in place. You're looking at the first month, kind of already there. And it'd just be automatic 2/3. Just because it's in
Kick me
May.
out. Keeps kicking me out.
Yeah, I think it's because there's another Zoom scheduled at 10, which you could jump in there and change the time. It's for all the E911.
Gotcha. So it kicked us out because you can only do one meeting at a
I
time?
just wonder.
Can we just get Doug on the phone and Crystal on the phone and we'll just
We've
proceed
got
forward?
Crystal.
Okay.
We've
Let
got
me
it
try that.
recording, and so if the Zoom meeting is off, then it is off, but
I went to
There's a
look at it
911
and find
meeting
it
soon.
on the Zoom site right now.
The meeting?
So I don't know what happened.
Can they file for unemployment over and above the 2/3 if they want to, if they don't have time to?
Hi, Doug, I'm gonna put you on speaker. Our Zoom meeting kicked us out, so we're going old
why
school
would they
with the
want,
phones
why
now.
would they want to do that?
Okay, you are on speaker
But
now.
you're not gonna get,
Crystal, you still there?
you're not gonna get pay and
Yes, I
unemployment.
am.
Okay.
John was doing, I think of making
Yeah, she was coming up with a resolution for you.
Okay, so we were talking about the FFCRA policy, and this is what the resolution would say. This 80 hours of paid leave for full-time employees or 2-week equivalent pay for part-time employees is a separate source of paid leave required for FFCRA. During this 80 hours, employees' personally accrued leave banks will not be depleted, and employees will be paid 100% of their salary for any of the 6 qualifying events.
Yes.
Don, this is Doug. Is that, I think, I know I wanted to go 100%, but I said I would vote for, is this what Megan, or I'm sorry, Aaron and Crystal agreed to?
So Doug, this is the different one. This is the emergency paid sick leave piece that is that federal legislation that went into effect April 1st. So the board,
Okay.
the proposal had been, or at least the discussion had been, that this 80 hours of paid leave for all employees would be at 100% of either their full-time
And
schedule or their,
we expanded it to include 3 more qualifying events at 100% for that 80 hours versus the state minimum and mandated, just the top 3 were 100%. So this is separate, but this is the first 80-hour under FRCRA? Whatever.
And one through 6.
1 through 6,
yeah,
yep.
correct.
Okay.
We don't-
I would move the motion that Don read to us.
No, she's not done yet. I don't know as though she's done yet.
And so the other part of the motion is going to, do you want the other part of the motion to be, you approve the rest of the policy as written, except for with those 2 changes?
And the 2 changes are the FFCRA, we added 3 more subsections that instead of having it be 2/3 pay for those, and this is basically if you have a child that's causing you to need to be home, then there's an 80-hour ability to go watch them at 100% pay. So the
For 2 weeks.
For 2 weeks. So the legislation said the top 3 were 100%, and the next 3 were 2/3. We have made a motion, or we have adopted in discussion, or working on adopting via our discussion, to make all 6 of them be 100% wages for those 2 weeks under the federal legislation that was passed on April 1st. So that's part 1.
Isn't that what Don read to me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
so,
Doug.
So that's the first change, and then the second change that we have discussed thus far is with respect to, in the event our governor issues or the president issues a stay-in-place order, then the proposal as brought to us was basically a 2/3 pay. We've increased that to an 80 hours of 100% pay, and then we go to a 2/3 pay. Those were the changes that I recall in our discussion. Is that?
Okay, and we want to do that all in one motion, not 2.
You want to do one motion that, my suggestion would be that you do one motion that approves the change, that includes the changes that you're talking about making to the written policies that was sent out to you, and then that you adopt the policy as amended.
Changed, as amended, yes. And all of those essential employees, multiple departments, like the engineers department, the sheriff, and other ones, if you're working under a shelter-in-place order, no real effect. This is for a much smaller subsection of our employees where after 80 hours are exhausted, then they will then go to 2/3. So that's really our change. I mean, in summary.
Okay, so we're putting it all into one motion.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm okay. I'm good. Is it? I don't know that I need it read again. I would move the motion that was proposed.
And just so I'm clear, the motion that's on the table is to adopt these policies as amended via our discussion, which has been recorded in 3 different places, so we got it. We're all on the same page. We've got a motion and a second. Tracy, roll call.
Show,
Aye.
McIntyre,
Aye.
DeCook.
Aye. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Doug.
Second.
Roll call.
Roll call.
Show,
Aye.
McIntyre,
Aye.
DeCook.
Aye. We are adjourned.
Thank you.